This video is sponsored by CarnageCon. More about them later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k, the weekly video series where we go through undefeated results from competitive events the world over and talk about what's winning. And this week's going to be an interesting week because a lot of the competitive community is focused on the 1,000-player London Grand Tournament, one of the largest events that we've had in 40k that's, at the time of recording, is still ongoing. We also had dozens of large team events go down this week, so the singles, GT, and major scene, which we normally cover in this series, is a little bit smaller this week. However, I will certainly be talking about the results of those events and the London Grand Tournament in content later this week, so please stay tuned for that. Now, as we move on to a metagame breakdown to talk about what we did have going on this week, we can see a very stark consolidation of the metagame. Now, obviously, this is an extremely small sample size because of the low quantity of events going down, but we do have 3 event wins from Adeptus Mechanicus, or at least undefeated results from Adeptus Mechanicus. A little bit of a surprise, but not too big of one because of the massive buffs that the faction got in the previous data slate update. We also see some good results from Tyranids, taking down 2 events, similarly to undefeated results from Adeptus Sororitas. Now, both Tyranids and Sororitas had 2 separate detachments going undefeated this week, so we're going to be talking about all 4 of those lists to break down armies from different detachments. Chaos Knights also going undefeated, winning the Münsterland Major number 3. That event went 5 rounds, and Chaos Knights took the first place on tiebreakers, but Adeptus Mechanicus were also undefeated there. They took 2nd place. Tau Empire getting 1 win at the Second City Games, and Drukhari with the Traunstein Cup. However, this is Drukhari using the old codex. I'll still talk about the list, but keep in mind that this will be index rules, and when we see the release of the actual codex in just a week or so, that list will likely be outdated. So with that, let's move on and talk about these lists just after a word from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by the Carnage Gaming Convention and its miniature gaming events presented by Drago Games. Held every year in Killington, Vermont in the month of October, the Carnage Gaming Convention is a long-running staple of New England tabletop gaming and features events for a dizzying variety of games, including board games, tabletop games, and of course miniature games, all hosted in a picturesque Vermont ski resort. So not only do you get to be surrounded by cool games, but also incredible vistas. Look at these vistas. Available at the event are going to be competitive events for Age of Sigmar, Warhammer 40,000, as well as a variety of other specialist games, including Mordheim, Kill Team, Star Wars Shatterpoint, and Bolt Action. Carnage 28 is occurring October 24th through 26th, 2025, so check out the link in the video description to get your tickets today. So let's start with our front runners for the week, Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, every single Adeptus Mechanicus that went undefeated this week was using a similar list. A Halo Screed Battle Clade being supported by Belisarius Call, a combination of Tech Priest Manipuli with some combo of Cataphron Breachers, Sicarians, and Iron Strider or Sidonian units. In this case, we're going to move over to the Münsterland Major 3, where Arthur Gutler went 5-0 with this style of army. Now, in this case, Arthur was playing Belisarius Call and 2 Tech Priest Manipuli. One of them with Cognitive Reinforcement. That grants the benefits of both Conqueror and Protector imperatives to the unit that he is attached into. This is a big deal for Cataphron Breachers because they are both effective at shooting and in melee, and so getting ballistic kill bonuses and the other bonuses for both of those for their battle line synergies is pretty big. It allows you to actually make use of your expensive weapon platform because you can actually shoot and melee at the same time instead of having to choose to be effective at only one. Now, the other one with Sanctified Ordnance gives you an additional 6 inches of range, which is especially good on Cataphron Destroyers. It also gives you rerolls on hazardous checks, so if you have a Plasma Culverin equipped Cataphron Destroyer unit, you can overcharge those plasma weapons without fear of losing expensive 35-point models to an unfortunate round of hazardous checks. In addition, you also get a bonus range for their Cognis Flamers, which is great because these guys are pretty good on Overwatch. So, we have those 2 Manipuli joining into 2 Cataphron units, a Breacher and a Destroyer team. We have 2 units of Skitarii Rangers to objective secure some forward objectives and also provide those battle line synergies to the army that are so important for Adeptus Mechanicus. We have 2 units of Tyranxi Sky Stalkers to act as utility, These guys are great because they can deep strike into an area, shoot, and then move after shooting, allowing them to get closer than they could normally get with deep strikes, steal objectives from people, or simply wrap enemies and prevent them from moving. Now, in addition to that, we also have a Sicarian Infiltrator unit to act as forward operation, hold down the midboard, and complete some early game secondaries, as well as a Servitor Battleclade. Now, this is the kill team that's able to advance and perform actions. So these guys are good not only as a weapon platform, you do get a couple of heavy weapons as well as some flamers and the ability to advance and perform actions, which makes them a very good, both just a normal utility unit. You get 9 models for just 60 points, which is solid, but also they have the capacity to score very highly as well. Now, from there, we have a total of 4 Iron Strider Balisari. That's in 2 units of 1 individual Iron Striders, as well as a larger unit of 2. So we're maxing out our field allowance for Iron Striders, but obviously not taking the full, simply the full big unit of 3 to give the army a little bit more mobility, so we don't have to put all 3 of these huge base models together and maneuver them as a unit. The 3 can separate out and actually cover different areas of the table. The benefit here, though, is that now with their additional attacks plus twin-linked, the Cognis Las Cannons, when rerolling from Belisarius Call's Oath of Moment equivalent, are incredibly effective. Essentially getting full rerolls, potentially plus 1 a hit from Protector Imperative, thanks to the ranged attack bonus, as well as sustained hits 1, makes them some of the most effective Las Cannon platforms in the entire game. And so putting as many of these into a list as possible is definitely an effective way to deal with tanks. Now, from there, we also have a single Scorpius Dune Rider that can carry around some of these infantry, whether that's Rangers in the early game and then switch that out for Rust Stalkers, or simply protecting the Rust Stalkers for the entire game. Now, obviously, the Sicarian Rust Stalkers are in there as well. These guys have incredible synergy with Halo Screed Battleclade, largely for their ability to advance and charge thanks to the Predation Protocol's Halo Override buff, which allows these guys to benefit from both their +2 to advance and +2 to charge, giving them a crazy threat range. So we have some pretty solid shooting from Cataphront Breachers, as well as these Iron Strider Balisari. The Iron Striders can focus fire onto targets that you're rerolling hits against, while the Breachers will get hit rerolls just while they're near battle line units innately. So both of those range platforms are kind of operating independently. And then we can there either screen the enemy out, prevent them from moving with the Tyraxi Skystalkers and Sicarian Infiltrators, or push Sicarian Rust Stalkers basically at infinite distance forward to disrupt enemies on their objectives, simply kill them, or obviously just keep them penned into their own deployment zone while we continue to pound at them with these heavy guns in the back line. Obviously, an extremely effective attrition force with the Adeptus Mechanicus trademark efficacy at scoring, and a good example of why Halo Screed Battleclade is so powerful with these new buffs to Mechanicum. Now with that, let's move on to Adeptus Sororitas. At the WitCon Host 2025 event, Simon Olsen went 5-0 with a Champions of Faith detachment. Now, this is a fairly aggressive melee-oriented variety of Adeptus Sororitas that, while it does fall down, I think, a little bit in consistency to the more standard builds of, for example, Hallowed Martyrs, does have a ton of pressure and a lot of play in competitive lists. We just don't see it quite as often as we do see the more regular builds. Now, in this case, Simon was playing a Hospitaller with Sanctified Amulet. Enemies cannot set up within 12 inches, which allows you to either screen out your backline or push forward to prevent enemies from coming in with close deep strikes. That's incredibly good if you're expecting to see things like Dash Route Terminators, Chaos Demons, or a lot of these closed deep striking armies that could hop in and really mess up your units from reserve. We then have 2 unenhanced Hospitallers alongside Judith Irawita and Morven Val. Following that up is a Battle Sister squad. We do have a pair of Immolators and a Dominion squad. So if I had to hazard a guess, we would be combat squadding the Sisters and one half of the Dominions with 4 Meltaguns. A Battle Sisters unit, both of them filling the Immolators. Those Immolators also equipped with multi-meltas, so that's a ton of forward pressure anti-tank, and that gives you 2 smaller units that can help additionally screen your backline and act as utility. Speaking of which, we also have an Arco-Flagellant squad, which is another nice 45-point unit of 3 individuals. While these guys are good at clearing light infantry, a lot of times you can just take them because they're extremely efficient and relatively fast. Now from there, we have the beef of the army. That is 3 units of 10 Celestian Sacrosants. Now these will attach in with the Hospitallers, which are going to give them a Feel No Pain and give them the ability to regenerate. And the Celestian Sacrosants having a permanent -1 to be wounded while being led, in addition to a 4+ invulnerable save, is already super difficult to kill. On top of that, this detachment can also use Bastion of Faith to make these units -1 to hit, so you're applying a -1 to hit and wound effect to these units that are already difficult to remove and then will regenerate once you don't kill them. And this detachment can also supercharge their damage output and giving them improved strength and AP, using To the Heart of Heresy, and lethal or sustained hits from Suffer Not the Unfaithful. Not to mention the fact that the detachment ability, selecting these as righteous models, can also improve their weapon skill as well as movement characteristics, making them at a baseline more effective. So this gives you a huge number of very effective melee combatants that are going to be able to gum up the midboard of the table. All the while, you're going to be blasting your opponent off the face of the earth with 3 Castigators as well as a unit of Paragon Warsuits from the backline. We do have Morven Vol in the army who's going to attach into those Paragon Warsuits. I feel like at this point I shouldn't have to tell you how powerful the combination of these two data sheets are. Morven Vol gives the unit full hit and wound rerolls in addition to being a powerful ranged battery herself, and the unit is going to get +1 to hit and wound against monsters and vehicles, making them one of the most effective anti-tank units in the entire game. From there, we also have that being buffed by a pair of Castigator autocannons, as well as a single battle cannon Castigator. Oftentimes, you could use that battle cannon Castigator to kind of set up for the autocannon Castigators, because the battle cannon is not only range independent, it doesn't care about getting rapid fire for being close to enemies, but it also has ignore cover built in. So it's able to fire into high save units in cover and still get value, whereas the autocannon's firing into cover without the bonus of another Castigator shooting that target first and giving you +1 AP against it. Those things can usually fail into strong armor saves with save bonuses. Very cool to see an army like this at the top tables once again. It's been a couple of weeks at least since we've talked about a Champions of Faith, and I was beginning to think it had kind of fallen by the wayside in favor almost entirely of Hallowed Martyrs, but that is not the case. For further surprise, we can continue to talk about Adeptus Sororitas and move ourselves over to the Saima 40k event, where Karlet Tukia went undefeated with another non-Hallowed Martyrs Adeptus Sororitas list. This one is Bringers of Flame. Now, it's been a really long time since we talked about Bringers of Flame on this channel, because at the very beginning of the edition, when the Adeptus Sororitas Codex was released, this detachment was absolutely disgustingly broken and had to be nerfed massively in order to be brought back in line. And for a while, that meant that it totally fell off the face of the earth and nobody played it. However, more recently, I would say within the last 6 months or so, there have been some pushes to play armies that are extremely dedicated transport focused in this detachment and make use of the detachment's specific synergies with transports and with fast moving ranged attackers. And I've been honestly shocked that we haven't seen more success from these armies, because they are not only aggressive, put massive amounts of models on the battlefield, but are also now, especially with bonuses to things like Retributor squads, have significantly more effective attacks. And I've played against multiple of these, one of them even in the finals of an online GT recently, that ended up being an incredibly tight 1-point game. So these armies are absolutely super effective, and it's cool to see them starting to get some traction in larger table games. So here's what Carla was taking in this particular build. It starts with Morven Vol, and a trademark of these armies is that they usually don't take too many characters. They're not really focused on character synergies like you would see in a Hallowed Martyrs list, because the detachment doesn't really have a lot of use for characters. So we just have Morven Vol with her unit of Paragon Warsuits to be an absolutely disgusting unit that will kill whatever. We then have 3 units of 3 Arcoflagellants for utility, and we follow the rest of that with transports, battle tanks, and things to go inside transports to stand next to battle tanks. This includes a trio of Immolators, 2 of them with Flamers, 1 of them with a Multi-Melta, as well as 3 Castigators. Following that up, we also have 3 units of Dominions, all of those Dominions equipped with 4 Melta Guns. So just like we talked about previously, we have 3 units that can combat squad into the Immolators. Those Dominions can split into units of 5 plus 4 Meltas. The Meltas can jump into the Immolators and scout the Immolators forward. The entire army gets assault on every single ranged weapon it has, and +1 strength when it attacks enemies within 6 inches. In addition, you can also use Carry Forth the Faithful to give them advance and disembark a la an Impulsor. So, if this army goes first, it's able to take an Immolator, scout it 6 inches forward, auto 6 if you're lucky enough to roll a high number on your miracle dice, its advance roll to go another potential 18 inches on an advance, then pay a CP to disembark a unit of Dominions. That allows you to place a Dominion squad from the edge of your deployment zone 27 inches up in your opponent's face. That Dominion squad is then going to let loose with a ton of potentially strength 10 meltas, and when you come back to fight them, they can simply reactive move back into the transport. If you do have the command points floating in order to fuel the stratagems in this detachment, you can also use Blazing Ire to reactive fire into enemies that shoot at those transports. So you could get multiple activations out of these Dominion squads in a single turn. So with 30 of these Dominions in units of 5 all over the center of the battlefield, all of them with reactive moves and all of them with multiple Melta attacks, they are super tough to deal with because you have to be all constantly worrying about whether or not you can clear those units out. If you don't, they're just going to continuously score primary, and they're going to continuously score out their secondaries, and they're just going to beat you down on the raw victory points. Even if you can clear them, they have likely pushed you so far back into your deployment zone that the 3 Castigators and Morvenvault in the army, just like we talked about with Champions of Faith, can absolutely ruin your day. Now, from there, we also have 3 Retributor squads. The Retributor squads gain huge bonuses when they attack enemies that have killed your stuff. And when you're throwing 30 Dominions in 6 units of 5, as well as 3 Immolators, potentially into your opponent's deployment zone from the very early stage of the game, it is likely that by the time the Retributors actually get to fight, your entire army has killed an Adeptus Sororitas unit, so those Retributors are getting their rerolls and +1 to hit and wound against everything in your army. On top of that, if they get close enough, and don't forget, all of their weapons are assault, their multi-meltas as well can go up to strength 10, so you can be firing strength 10 meltas with also +1 to wound and reroll 1s. So these Retributor squads in the late game can mop up after all the stuff that pushes forward to actually deal with your Immolators and your Dominions. From there, this particular build was running its 3 Castigators, all with autocannons for maximum shooting. Especially with 3 Immolators on the table, you have the capacity to strip cover from a lot of enemies, so you don't necessarily need the battle cannons here. The Castigators have a higher upside in damage, and again, they can also potentially also go to strength 10 because they have the access to +1 strength if they shoot something right next to them. Personally, I'm very scared of these armies. I think they're really good, and I think that the use and abuse of the transport mechanics in 10th edition 40k is always going to be strong, and especially in armies like these that can kind of create a whole game plan out of just the use of very aggressive and high efficiency transports with units inside them. As I said at the beginning, very cool to see an army like this doing well because I think it is underrepresented in the Adeptus Sororitas sphere. Now from there, we're going to move on to another faction that had multiple undefeated, and that is Tyranids. We are going to start with the South African Nationals, which is very cool. Awesome to see Warhammer 40k from another continent that we don't typically hear from, but in this case, Orion Adams went 5-0 with a Subterranean assault. Another detachment that might be a little bit underrepresented right now. In this particular case, Orion was playing a Neurotyrant, a Trigon with Trigon Prime to give him that +1 strength and synapse effect, a Gargoyle unit, which is especially effective in Subterranean Assault for basically the exact same reason that we talked about Taraxi Skystalkers in the Adeptus Mechanicus list, except with the fact that they can 6-inch deep strike outside of a tunnel marker. So they fly out of the tunnel 6 inches away from enemies, shoot them, do no damage because their guns are not good, but then move 6 inches. So they can basically just end their deep strike after the dust has settled outside engagement range of you without charging, without allowing for any sort of heroic interventions and dodging a lot of reactive movement phase stratagems. They're incredibly difficult to deal with when it comes to holding objectives and stopping yourself from getting move blocked. We have a Biovore for scoring, a Neurogaunt unit, which can hold down the backline for a really, really low cost. I've also seen in a lot of Tyranid lists, and this is a little bit of a cool piece of technology. It's not being used in this case, obviously, but just as an aside, you can use a big unit of 20 Neurogaunts for very cheap to actually blank your opponent on Cull the Horde, and you just keep them to screen your backline objective through the entire game. I like it when little things like that get used. In this case, we're just taking a unit of 11 because they're some of the most efficient bodies for points in the entire game. We then have 2 Ravener squads to construct our tunnels, a unit of Zoanthropes to attach with the Neurotyrant, use Enfilading Emergence to ignore cover and sustained hits 1 when the unit arrives from reserve, making them pretty effective coming out of those tunnel markers. Despite being a ranged unit, they are much better on a heavy terrain board because they can angle lines of sight onto enemies that your opponent can't necessarily respond to. And if they get multiple activations out of them, they're going to accrue a lot of value. However, in a lot of instances, they will drop in an open board and immediately be killed by something, so they'll usually trade down. We then have 2 Exocrines, a Haruspex, a Maleceptor, a Norn Emissary, and a Tyrannifex with a Rupture Cannon. The mass of aggressive monsters in this army is further incentivized by Swarming Assault, which allows any monster that arrives from reserve to broadcast a 6-inch aura of charge rerolls, giving you 2 or 3 times your command point cost investment in these massive numbers of monsters. So in the situation where you can set up tunnel markers, strip your opponent's screening in the early turns with Zoanthropes or with some of your other shooting, Haruspexes, for example, by using Tunnel Network or using your reserves to bounce them around the battlefield. Then, on a future turn, come in with your Raveners, create tunnel markers that then allow you to place Trigons, Haruspex, Norn Emissaries, Maleceptors, all these things in positions where they want to charge. Swarming Assault can potentially give you 4 or 5 command points worth of charge rerolls very easily. So it very much incentivizes these aggressive plays with a lot of monsters all at the same time. It should be noted that you don't have to be a monster to benefit from the charge rerolls, but having more monsters gives you more potential outlets for it, and typically Tyranid monsters are where a lot of their big heavy hitters come from anyway. Now, moving on to War in the Wastelands, let's stick with Tyranids for a sec and talk about John Camacho's list. John was running a very aggressive version of Vanguard Onslaught. Now, we have seen a little bit of success from Vanguard Onslaught recently due to the new release of hyper-adapted Raveners, which can give them a very strong anti-tank option that has the Vanguard Invader keyword. However, in this case, John wasn't playing these. He was playing 3 Broodlords, one with Neuronode to give you redeployments, one with Stalker to get +1 to hit and wound against a particular target, a Death Leaper, and a Neurotyrant with Haunting Grounds to mess up your opponent's reserves. That's an incredibly underrated enhancement, by the way. It has the chance to battle shock enemies that come out of reserve, which always forces your opponent to reconsider whether they're going to be doing reserve play. It also works if your opponent has effects that put them in strat reserve, so things like a lot of uppy downy effects will be affected by Hunting Grounds, and that can make your opponent's plan to consistently score secondaries over the course of the game really inconsistent, because suddenly you draw a secondary like, I don't know, Cleanse or Establish Locus, and you go to come out of reserve to perform that action, immediately battle shock yourself and become unable to perform that action. And because it happens in the movement phase, it's not affectable by Insane Bravery. So there's no way around it. If you fail the battle shock test, you fail, and that sucks. And now we have a Biovore for utility, 30 Gene Stealers to attach with those Broodlords, so we have a ton of forward pressure if this army goes first. It's able to scout forward, advance and charge all of those Gene Stealers, and really pen your opponent into their deployment zone. 3 Lictors to dominate the mid-board of the table, push back your opponent's infiltrators, and open space for those Gene Stealers to move forward. A Neurogaunt unit to hold down the back line, a trio of Neurolictors at their newly reduced points value. Again, if we have any additional Battle Shock synergies here, like that Hunting Grounds enhancement, the Neurolictors are going to go crazy because they're going to be projecting that +1 to wound against Battle Shocked targets. With 2 Trigons for some heftier anti-tank. These guys are phenomenal off the Rapid Ingress, especially because they can advance and charge, so you can actually ingress in a lot of spots and then run them up the battlefield. And especially Rapid Ingressing within 18 inches of the Neurotyrant allows you to very consistently apply Synapse to them, which is good. Plus, they can follow the Broodlords in and gain their Synapse bonus too. We also have a Von Ryan's Leaper unit to clear enemy screens that would otherwise prevent the Trigons and the Gene Stealers from getting in, and a Zoanthrope unit to go alongside that Neurotyrant. And now, a nice thing about the Zoanthrope unit is that because it's an infantry unit, even though it has the Neurotyrant inside it, it can use Invisible Hunter to up-down itself and put itself into strategic reserve to bounce around the table. And you could even use Seeded Broods to bring it in on battle round 1. So you could potentially jump it in off a table edge in order to get shots from an angle your opponent wasn't expecting. I think the ideal position for this list is that if your opponent doesn't have phenomenal screening, or you're able to clear their screens with the mid-board presence like the Lictors and the Von Ryan's Leapers, you can deliver an absolutely devastating alpha strike by pushing 1 to 2 Broodlords into your opponent's face, potentially rapid ingressing a Trigon and running them in, bringing Zoanthropes off a table edge, potentially with Seeded Broods to bring them in turn 1 if you're able to get that big push early with all the scouts, or bringing them into your opponent's deployment zone on turn 2, impact with all of that melee all at the same time, shoot with that powerful gun battery, and then immediately force Shadow in the Warp at the start of your opponent's next turn to then make your subsequent follow-up even more powerful with the 3 Neurolictors affecting your opponent with the auras. If you don't have a ton of screening and a ton of way to deal with these aggressive units early on, you're just going to be inundated by Tyranids, all of them potentially with wound bonuses and other powerful effects that can disrupt your counterattack and make their follow-up attack even better. So if this is able to get the perfect 1-2 punch off and you're not able to stifle its aggression in any way, it's just going to knock you out immediately. Now with that, let's move over to a much smaller army from the numerous hordes of Tyranids. And this is the actual winner of the Münsterland Major 3 with a 5-0 record, Niklas Freirichs, who went undefeated with a Chaos Knight's Infernal Lance. Now, Niklas, in his list submission, named this list the 3x3, which I appreciate because it's a very simple list. It's 3 double Gatling Cannon Knight Despoilers, no enhancements, 3 War Dog Carnivores, and 3 War Dog Stalkers. And that's it. That's the entire list. It's a lot of focus put into these Knight Despoilers to do a ton of damage. We can make them faster, we can give them sustained hits, we can give them ignore cover with the detachment benefits, and they are good into basically every target that's not toughness 12 or higher. Even if they are, the volume of fire might be able to knock them down anyway, so I don't know. We also then have a ton of high OC aggressive units from the Carnivores and Stalkers, all of which have powerful melee profiles. And the Stalkers obviously bringing that Demon Breath Spear, so for some more dedicated anti-tank into the higher toughness stuff. So it's incredibly efficient, it's incredibly effective thanks to all of the flexibility you get from Malefic Surges, and it just seems kind of frightening. And from there, we're moving over to the Second City Games GT, where Jordan Neck went undefeated with a Mont-Ka. This is the Tau Empire early game detachment, where you get bonuses on battle rounds 1 through 3, but you peter out towards the late game. And this is actually kind of a classic version of Mont-Ka that we haven't seen in a really long time. It is making a little use of the improved Riptide battlesuit profile that the faction did get in the most recent Data Slate update, but not focusing on that entirely. Now, in this army, we're taking 2 Cadre Fireblades as well as a single Enforcer Commander with coordinated exploitation. That enhancement, when the enhanced unit becomes an observer and it guides against a specific target, grants everything attacking that target sustained hits 1, which is important because, first of all, the Enforcer Commander is one of the harder characters to kill. He's going to provide that AP reduction to his unit, which makes them tough, but it's also going to add a lot more effectiveness to the Breacher teams that we're playing in this particular list. Now, these Breacher teams haven't really been seen in a while, but we do have a lot of transport and sort of aggressive play synergies in a Mont-Ka detachment. It does make sense because it is, of course, the early game aggressive detachment. And that includes the combination of things like aggressive mobility for a 1 command point stratagem that allows you to automatically advance 6 inches rather than rolling, combined with a Devilfish's rapid deployment. This allows you to move a Devilfish potentially 18 inches and then disembark a unit of Breachers. Those Breachers are going to get lethal hits from the detachment ability, and if you are being spotted for by the Enforcer Commander's unit, they also then gain sustained hits and full wound rerolls targeting enemies on objectives. That's all benefited by the Cadre Fireblades, who grant +1 attack to every single ranged weapon in the unit, including his own 2 gun drones and his own pulse rifle, giving the unit a grand total of 39 shots, hitting on 2s, targeting an enemy that's been guided with sustained hits 1, lethal hits, and full wound rerolls. It's a lot of damage coming out of what is otherwise a relatively efficient unit. With no enhancements or anything, these Breacher teams only run 150 points, including the character, which is not the cheapest thing in the world, but not wildly expensive. On top of that, we also have a broadside battlesuit team equipped with heavy rail rifles, a Star Scythe battlesuit squad to attach that Enforcer Commander into, giving him a shield drone equipped bunker to hop into in order to act as a guiding unit, but also allow the army to deal with high volume enemies. These guys do get that bonus AP targeting non-monsters or vehicles, which makes them very good at even clearing out high save characteristic infantry. 2 Hammerhead gunships, one of these equipped with a railgun, one of them equipped with an ion cannon, which benefits the lethal hits quite a bit. The railgun is a nice inclusion here because it allows you to late game pretty hard. Once the lethal hits peter out from your army on battle rounds 4 and 5, you still want a high impact gunshot to keep your opponent honest. We have a unit of crew carnivores for some early game midboard control, a Piranha for another scout, 3 stealth battlesuits for additional spotting, as well as a Pathfinder team and 2 Riptide battlesuits. So we have a ton of early game pressure from these Devilfish pushing forward, clearing out enemies on objectives. We have 4 total infiltrators, the Pathfinder team and the Stealth Battlesuit teams. However, the Pathfinder team also gets Scout alongside the Crew Carnivores, so a lot of this army is able to play in the middle of the table, which creates space for the Hammerhead gunships and the Riptide battlesuits to deal massive damage. Now, those Riptide battlesuits are also going to have much more sustained damage with the improved strength characteristic that they got from the recent update, but lethal hits on a relatively high volume, high impact shot that they have from their ion accelerator is also always going to be good. It seems like we've seen a cavalcade of Cao Yan recently, so it's cool to see a little bit of old school breacher-focused Mon-Ka on the table. And with that, we're going to move over to our last army of the day. This is going to be Sebastian Kipling playing Drukhari in a Sky Splinter Assault, going 5-0 at the Traunstein Cup, proving that not only Skari can win events with Drukhari, I guess. Now, I will obviously remind you that this is going to be Index Drukhari, so once the Codex comes out, a lot of these mechanics are going to be changing. However, this was a Sky Splinter Assault detachment led by an Archon equipped with the Nightmare Shroud, so you can't be targeted with Overwatch, which is a big deal for these Drukhari units that are going to be disembarking transports, moving, and charging alongside Toughness 3 light infantry units that get a huge benefit from the Archine's leadership ability, and that most enemies would love to try to peel off with Overwatch, but having the Nightmare Shroud helps quite a bit. We have a second, an upgraded Archon, Urian Rakarth, Lilith Hesperax, and a Beastmaster. A couple of sad inclusions there that are going to be going away once the Codex becomes legal. We then have 2 units of Kabalite Warriors, a unit of Rex, and a unit of Witches, one of them. We have 3 Venoms to carry around some of those utility squads and split the Witches into 2 units of 5, as well as 2 Raiders. Now, the Raiders could be carrying a combination of the Kabalite Warriors if they remain in 10-mans instead of going into the Venoms, or it could be carrying around multiple units of things like these Incubi or other utility, like Rax or the Combat Squatted Witches as well. We have 2 Chronos, as well as a Grotesque unit, 2 Incubi squads, which is likely where the Archons are going into because those are very hefty melee profiles, getting the full hit and wound rerolls when empowered from the Archon's leadership ability plus lands from the detachment ability. We have a Mandrake squad for utility, 2 units of Scourges, one with Haywire Blasters for anti-vehicle work, one with Dark Lances for anti-whatever, plus a pair of Talos as well in order to close out the game in the late game. Tons and tons of small utility units running around with all the Venoms, splitting off a lot of these light infantry units into multiples, so you're able to spread over the entire board, gain a ton of traction on secondaries, and force your opponent to deal with multiple units and overcommit into your trash effectively in order to compete with you on primary, which then allows you to counter hit with the Incubi, the ranged attacks from either Kabalite Warriors getting their ignore cover and potentially sustained hits from all the detachment abilities, or things like the Talos squad. Very classic Sky Splinter Assault. Nice to see it do well. It's going to be interesting to see Drukhari with the new Codex being released. It does feel like a lot of that faction is going to be changing at its face, a lot of long threat ranges, but potentially a little bit less damage than we see from the faction currently. But I will be interested to see what good players get out of that Codex, because it does seem like a huge paradigm shift from the existing variety of Drukhari.
All right, I said Drukhari was the last one, but I lied to you. I did a little fib. I spoke falsehoods into this microphone, and maybe you even believed me. But this week, we're a little light on lists, so I'm going to dive into some of the X0-1 lists that we saw this weekend. Specifically, at the South African Nationals, one of the finals games had a natural draw, leaving 2 players with only a draw on their record, but otherwise all wins. And normally I don't cover draws on the channel, but obviously we're going to talk about it today. The first is going to be Jean-Louis von Niekerk, who is running a Black Spear task force from Deathwatch. Now, this is very different than a lot of the Black Spear task forces that we've seen. It's taking a Gravis Captain, Judiciar Lieutenant, a combi weapon lieutenant for lone operative utility stuff, plus a standard Watchmaster, as well as Watch Captain Artemis. Now, the Thief of Secrets Judiciary is particularly important. That enhancement's actually kind of insane. The Gravis Captain, if you load him out for melee, has 2 separate melee weapons. In this case, he's got a Relic Chainsword for a bunch of base 2 damage melee attacks in addition to his Bolt Storm. So 3 additional 2 damage extra attacks in addition to his Bolt Storm Gauntlet. However, he gets a passive +1 damage bonus from Thief of Secrets. As soon as he unlocks his minigame and kills an enemy model in melee, that Thief of Secrets turns into +2 damage, so he goes to having a grand total of 8 4 damage melee attacks at varying strength and AP characteristics. That's enormous. Even if he's just swinging for 5s onto a vehicle or something, all he needs to do is get a couple of those wounds through to absolutely cut things in half. So in the late game, this Gravis Captain becomes horrifyingly powerful. And alongside the Judiciary, this gives you additional counterpunch in case your opponents come to attack you. So, one thing that we see oftentimes with these Deathwatch army is that, especially these Indomitor Kill Team variants, and this list does have an Indomitor Kill Team in it, once they get engaged, they're not that exciting and they don't hit super hard. However, this guy can obviously hit incredibly hard, and if you let him, then he just levels up, and when he comes back in the next turn, he hits ludicrously hard. The Judiciary also gives you fight first, so he makes it more difficult to engage with you. So he makes it more difficult to engage with these units. We have 2 Fortis kill teams alongside a bunch of support. That includes an Incursor for +1 to hit with ranged attacks, an Infiltrator to hold the back line, and a bunch of vehicles. 1 Repulsor Executioner, a Stormspeeder Hailstrike, which is an interesting inclusion. This gives you +1 AP when targeting infantry units, if it targets them first. Now, first of all, I do want to talk about this thing. It's really cheap. For a T9 10-wound vehicle with Deep Strike baked in, 115 points is actually kind of a steal. The downside is that its weapon profiles are trash, and the weird thing about it is that it gives other things +1 AP when targeting the thing that it targeted, but it has a bunch of AP0 weapons that would really love to have +1 AP themselves. So its datasheet ability isn't particularly well considered. However, when you're talking about this army, which has 20 Fortis Marines in it, with a variety of fairly solid anti-tank weapons, including things like Castellan launchers, if you gain that +1 AP, you can actually push these AP characteristics of the light weapons up to AP1 or 2, but more importantly, the heavier specialist, especially if you issue ammunition rifles that these teams can get, can be pushed up to AP3 or even 4. So, with the bonus from even just one shot tanking a unit and applying the +1 AP bonus from the Hailstrike, those rifles shooting into random infantry squads can actually clear out even medium or heavy infantry very quickly, which is kind of a cool use case. On top of that, we also have a Stormspeeder Hammerstrike to flip cover off of people as well, to further push that AP characteristic improvement. It also works good alongside the Repulsor Executioner, I guess I should mention. That thing just shoot a million times, and getting +1 AP on all of its guns is certainly going to be helpful when clearing out mass infantry. Good against screens as well, so you can clear out things to then drop Indomitor kill teams in the future. Now, with that, we'll move on to the list that this drew in the finals, and this is Devin Duplessis, who was running a Mortarian's Hammer Death Guard list. Now, this is basically straight up just Death Guard from the pre-update, essentially. What a blast from the past this is. But Mortarian's Hammer, obviously, is the detachment that allows you to contagion enemies on the battlefield as long as you're 12 inches or more away from them at the start of the battle round, to then unlock all of your synergies like Plagueburst Crawlers, Eruption of Spores, and your Desperate Terminators teleporting nearby them. This army includes a Lord of Virulence with Tendrilless Emission, so that gives rerolls to nearby vehicles, in addition to his own ability to grant rerolls to things that he can see, alongside a Lord of Contagion. The Lord of Contagion is going to hop into a unit of 3 Deshrad Terminators. Now, on release, we saw this being basically like between 6 and 9 Deshrad Terminators. Obviously, they are too expensive now, and basically everything in this list went up in cost after the data slate update, or at least the pre-update that we saw to Death Guard. We have 2 units of 10 Poxwalkers, 2 units of 2 Chaos Spawn, all of that for utility purposes. And then the main heart of the list is the most stock standard Mortarians and Hammer stuff we could ever see. 3 Fetid Bloat Drones, 3 Myphitic Blight Haulers, 3 Plagueburst Crawlers. That's it. Full stop. We're done. All good. A very straightforward list, and you know what? I love to see it. But there's a couple extra lists for you. Let's wrap up the video. And with that, those are all the best armies of Warhammer 40k for this week. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks to CarnageCon for sponsoring this video. And thanks to everybody who supports Tactical Tortoise, whether that's over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.